Thank you, everybody. Nice to be with you today. It's been a while since I've been in front of students, but for many years that was my job. It was working very closely with college students, and I just thoroughly enjoyed it. The world's changed a little bit since I was in higher education. Pandemic has hit, and certainly Zoom has come into our world, and so I realize today I'm speaking to wonderful students here in person, and a faculty member and staff members, but also students that are online. So this is kind of a newer experience for me to present in this kind of format. What I thought I would do today, and first of all, thank you, Professor Fowler, for that introduction. I thought I would just share a little bit with you, a little bit about the career path that got me to where I am today, and not to be boastful about it, but just to describe a different journey that I took to throughout my career. If anything, I would tell you that when they say that you should get a broad education, learn how to write and read and be critical in thought and analysis, I think that I wish I could go back to those early faculty members that told me that, because I think it ultimately paid off in my career. I certainly was able to do a lot of really interesting things, not just be an accountant. And but I think it really came from kind of that deep understanding about the liberal arts and education. As I looked over the list of former speakers of this lecture series, this forum, I noticed most of them were for-profit leaders running for-profit entities. And assuming, are all of you business students? What I thought I might do today is just introduce you to another form of business. That is the nonprofit organization. Because there are many, many opportunities to work and have a career in the nonprofit world. In fact, many of you may spend some of your time in the for-profit world and then work for a nonprofit. Salt Lake Community College, I was talking to Professor Fowler earlier. She started her career in law, now became a professor. So I could say she was working for a for-profit law firm, but now works in a nonprofit, large institution of learning. So I think you might find in your career that you do both. You may volunteer for a nonprofit, which I hope you all will do, something that you're passionate about. And so I think hopefully today you'll learn a little bit about what is it like to work for a nonprofit? What are some of the nuances between a for-profit and a nonprofit? And just basically sharing my experience. And I've spent now 40 years in the nonprofit world. So I come to you with that kind of background. Let me first of all ask you a question. How many of you are working while you're going to school? Okay. And how many of you are what I would call traditional students, first time freshman students? Okay. And how many of you are pursuing the field that you want to be in, you think you're going to be doing professionally for your career? Have any of you made up your mind yet about what you want? What kind of field do you want to be in?
Finance.
Finance. Okay. How about
Finance?
Finance. Others? So you define it broadly. You haven't said I'm going to go work for Fidelity or Goldman Sachs. You've said finance, and I think that's so appropriate at your stage in your where you're thinking of professionally, is to keep your mind very broad about what you're thinking. I'm a Salt Lake native. I grew up in Sugar House and I went to Highland High School. One of the things I learned at an early age, my father ran a grocery store. And so I had three brothers. And so we were all drafted to be his employees in this grocery store. So from a very early age, I was sweeping floors, stocking shelves, checking out customers, whatever my dad needed us to do. I did that all the way up through my, through high school. And many of my friends worked for my dad. And so I learned a lot about work and showing up on time and all those things. But I also learned I didn't want to be in the grocery business. And that the only way I could maybe escape that was to go get an education. And so I enrolled at the University of Utah, thinking I wanted to be a doctor until I took the first chemistry class. And that about did it for me. I thought, oh, I've got to switch. So I moved over and I found real interest in accounting. I felt like accounting kind of gave me a lot of the core principles of business. And so it was just became something that was of great interest to me. When I finished my 4 years at the university, I went to the Career Center. Now, I know there's a Career Center here at Salt Lake Community College, and some of you will go on to a 4-year institution. If I leave one piece of advice to you, it would be make friends with the Career Center, because it's one of these resources at college universities that many students don't take advantage of. They don't realize that they're here to help you find that career or get that job that you want. And they're measured, their results are measured by how well you get employed, even your first salary. Those are all things they track. I went to the University of Career Center. I wanted a job in accounting. I wanted to work for an accounting. They helped me get it. They helped me work on my resume. They helped me on interview skills. I interviewed, and I'll be darned, I actually got a job with Cooper's Librand right here in Salt Lake City. And so I just, I need to go back to the university and the Career Center and thank them, because that first start really started with them helping me make sure I could market myself correctly. Public accounting was really interesting. I don't know how many of you know much about it. It can sound boring. You know, you're an auditor, you're a tax person, you're an analyst for business, you're a consultant. I took the auditing track, and one of the things that was great is it exposed me to lots of different businesses, ways of doing business. So I got to work on the Kennecott engagement. So I got to see what was a mining operation like. I also got to work on Blue Cross Blue Shield, which was a healthcare insurance company. That was really different. One of the organizations I worked on was Westminster College. And this was my first introduction to a nonprofit organization. And I learned that I didn't know much about fund accounting. It was different. It still had a lot of the same principles, but it was different. But I was able to work on that engagement for a couple of years and got to know that school and its finances. And I also worked on one of the very first technology companies down in Silicon Slopes. This was a company that got started with some investors who had this brilliant idea of doing language-assisted translation. And after I became a CPA, after 3 years of working for the firm, I went for the money. This is lesson number 2. Sometimes going for the money doesn't bring passion or happiness. This little company offered me twice what I was making, and I thought it was a great opportunity, and started driving down to Provo every day. And within 3 months, I knew I was in the wrong place, wrong culture, wrong outlook for the business. Even though I was making great money, it just wasn't the right thing. And so I was going to go back to being a CPA, back to the firm, and Westminster called me and said, hey, you know, we know you've been over here, you've looked at our books, you have a business manager position open, would you like to come to our school? And I thought, well, you know, I didn't love auditing. I thought maybe that would be a good choice, thinking I would be there for a few years. So in 1981, I became the business manager for Westminster College. I was fairly young at the time, and it was an opportunity that came just because I had had that early experience and of knowing their books. And it was an interesting time for this really wonderful college that we have in our state. It's a private independent college, but at the time I joined, they were just moving away from a church affiliation relationship to an independent college relationship. It had a big impact on the institution. The church, the Presbyterian church, had been funding a portion of the costs of our school, and all of a sudden that funding source wasn't there. And so we had to rethink the business model of Westminster. And I was fortunate to be there during a really wonderful time of growth and development. We built a number of buildings and built an endowment and lots of things. So it was a really interesting job for me. That thought maybe all I was going to do was accounting. I ended up working in buildings, personnel matters, capital planning, lots of interesting assignments. And I did that for 26 years. And then one day the president walked into my office and said, I just lost our vice president of development. How would you like to be a fundraiser for the school? I thought, am I not doing a good job as the CFO? And no, we've got a really good number two. We really need somebody to come over and run fundraising. I really wasn't sure I could even do it. Ask for money. And he said, do you believe in this place? I said, yeah, I do. He said, then you'll be a successful fundraiser. He was right. I was able to not treat it as charity, but as investment. So as I learned to meet with donors and foundations and corporations, I always was able to make the point that supporting a school, college, or university is really an investment in their future and in the future of young people. So I did that for 8 years and was at the right time with the right background, that when our president at the time took a leave of absence and it turned into a permanent leave, I was asked to serve as the interim president of Westminster. After a couple of months, I was asked to just serve as the permanent president of Westminster. And I did that for 3 years. I finished up my career. I thought my career at Westminster was really, to start out as a business manager and then end up being the president of the college. It was just the capstone of a wonderful career. And I really thought I was going to be done. And then the R. Harold Burton Foundation, which was one of the foundations that had been supporting our school, came knocking on my door just as I was starting to plan vacations and cruises and a few things, and said, why don't you come and work for us and see what the other side of philanthropy is? And so I've been doing that for the last 3 years. It's been very rewarding. One of the institutions we support is Salt Lake Community College. We just renewed a wonderful scholarship commitment to the PACE scholarship program. Kara Altman, who's here today, it's a program I've been working on with her. And I'm fortunate to be able to really engage with about 200 of our nonprofits in our community and help them and see their good work. And it really is, it's the kind of work that I enjoy getting up every day and going. So what I wanted to talk a little bit about today is why you should think about the nonprofit world as a possibility. There are differences in nonprofits. Let's just talk a little bit about those. Do any of you work for a nonprofit now, or are any of you involved in a nonprofit organization? Which one are you involved with? What is it?
America First.
America First, okay. Any others? Okay. You're with Salt Lake Community Council Foundation. Yeah. I promise you, during your professional careers, you will get involved in some way with a nonprofit, either volunteering or something that you care deeply about. Let's talk just a little bit about what a nonprofit is. And I'm going to have Russ here help me with some of this. A nonprofit corporation is an organization formed to serve the public good. And it could be anything like charitable, religious, educational, other public service reasons. This is kind of the generic definition of a nonprofit organization. There are actually several types. There are what we call public charities. They're all organized, they're tax exempt. They're all organized under this interesting IRS code section called 501c3. There are public charities and there are private foundations. I work for a private foundation. Salt Lake Community College is a public charity. What does that mean? It means that it collects revenues from tuition, government grants, private philanthropy. It's what helps. It doesn't just rely on customers and what customers pay for a product or a service. It has multiple sources of revenues. And what would be the public good of Salt Lake Community College? What is its public good? How are you all benefiting? Education. That is the public good. It's not profit, it is a public good. Well, there's a lot of examples of other kinds of organizations. Private foundations typically have one funding source. In the case of the foundation I work for, the R. Harold Burton Foundation, Robert Burton and Maybelle Covey, when they passed away in 1985, their estate, all their assets went into creating the R. Harold Burton Foundation. And my job is to manage those assets and help fulfill their philanthropic interests. So one funder, we don't raise money, we don't bring in more gifts. We only give what we can earn on our investment portfolio. So if you think of some of the foundations you may have read about as you walk around this campus, you may see Miller on it, you may see Eccles. Those are all private foundations. They're different than public charities. Some examples of public charities would be things like the Utah Food Bank, the 4th Street Clinic, Utah Humanities, Ballet West, Utah Symphony. They all, if you think about each of them, they all have, you could come down and look at what is their, what I would call their public good. There are some key differences between a nonprofit and a for-profit. And I know we have a professor of management here. and so you could help maybe articulate with me some of these differences, but let's just talk a little bit first. The difference between working for a nonprofit or a for-profit. Obviously a for-profit entity, you could think of some. Today, as I was coming in, General Motors announced they're just opening a new factory to make they're making Hummers, electric Hummers. I don't know how that's going to work, but they are going to sell those things and make a profit, right? General Motors is owned by shareholders, people that buy stock and expect dividends. And if the president of General Motors was up in front here and you asked her, what's the purpose of your organization? She might tell you about making trucks and cars, but she'd also say, got to make a profit. got to be able to give a return back to our investors. That is not what nonprofits do. They're not interested in profit. They're interested in fulfilling mission. So their purpose is very different. Mission versus profit. And there's nothing wrong with profit. It's just that when your whole basis for being organized isn't around the profit and motive, you're around mission, it changes some of the things that you're about. Funding is very different. In a for-profit entity, if you want to start a business, you can go get a bank loan to help you. You can put your own money into it. You can look for private investors. You can go public. Many of you have heard about some of these large companies that go public and they all of a sudden end up with shareholders and a lot of money. Think of the owner of the Utah Jazz who took his company and they went public. In essence, he sold his company to a bunch of shareholders. And so the funding source for profit entities is very different. Investments and the selling of your product. You know, if you're successful, you sell your product, you get income. That helps you to be able to pay a dividend or a return to your shareholders. Nonprofits typically don't charge what it costs them. Believe it or not, what you pay in tuition to Salt Lake Community College does not actually equal the cost of what it costs to educate. It costs more to actually educate you. There's a cost they probably don't tell you much about. The FTE cost of every student. My guess is it might be 4 or 5 times greater than what your tuition is. Well, what makes up that difference in Salt Lake Community College to help you with your education? Government, state of Utah puts quite a bit of money into Salt Lake Community College, and private philanthropy, donors who fund scholarships or fund buildings or things like that. So the funding model for nonprofits is different than for-profits. The diversity of audience is very different. For-profits are really focused on customers. Who's my customer? How do I market them? How do I sell to them? And in a nonprofit world, it's around who can best be served by the mission. So if you're a college or a university, it's students. That's what you're organized around, and meeting and fulfilling their needs. We don't call students customers. It can be the Utah Food Bank. They're helping individuals facing food shortage, and so their job is really to help gather up food and get it distributed and get it to the right people. Very mission focused. Leadership can be very different in a for-profit entity. It's all about the return on investment, the profit, and so oftentimes the compensation in a for-profit environment is based on bonuses, stock options. You know, you hear these business leaders that, you know, they'll talk about Jeff Bezos and some of those that, you know, they earn $40 million or you know, $200 million. It's all coming off of the results of the company. So the leadership team that is typically running a for-profit entity is very focused on results, business metrics, and oftentimes their compensation is very tied to that. That is very motivating. You know, if you're like I was when I was at your stage in my life, I needed money to make it work. And so I was always open and interested to that. But you have to understand that in working in that environment, what are you going to be judged on? It's how do you help make the company profitable? It's all about that. The leadership of a nonprofit, most nonprofits have volunteer boards that are the stewards of the organization. Does anybody know who owns Salt Lake Community College? Who do you think owns this college? You ever wondered that? Who owns it? It's state of Utah actually owns Salt Lake Community College. And it has a board of advisors, and it has there's the board of governors, there's individuals that are stewards over this institution. They hire the President Denise Upland. They hire her, they fire her, they judge her, it's a different organizational structure, and they're most interested in can she fulfill mission, not necessarily profitability. So it's different, it attracts different kinds of leaders. And even further down the chain of leadership, you're really looking for people that believe in mission. And we'll go for that. We know that the culture is very different too. You know, when you're in a for-profit environment, and that focus is on profitability, it's a little more cutthroat in my view. You want to get ahead, you want to move up, you want to make the organization, if you're running a particular segment of the business, you want it to do better. And so the competition, there's a competitive spirit in for-profit entities that can be ruthless at times. And so you have to be aware of that. Organizationally, nonprofits tend to be a little more focused on kind of work life. There's a slower pace to them. And some of it comes back to how they're governed and what the expectations are. Not always. Some of these are generalities I'm suggesting. Taxation is very different. A for-profit entity, and if you've been listening to the news and the stimulus, these new stimulus or these new governmental programs, they're talking about, well, one of the ways we're going to do this is we're going to raise the corporate tax rate. So for-profit entities are always worried about taxes. They pay taxes, they pay a lot of taxes. They're always trying to figure out, well, how do I minimize taxes? Nonprofits are tax exempt. They don't pay taxes. They still file tax returns. So just like a corporation, a nonprofit files what they call a 990 tax return, and it's more of an information disclosure document. And they're pretty detailed. I actually saw the one for Salt Lake Community College. It's about 250 pages long. So I'm not going to ask for it again. So they do file tax returns with the government, and that's definitely one of the differences. And then finally, staffing. Staffing is, for profit. They're always looking for people that can help add to the bottom line. Sometimes they'll hire interns. As you move along in your education, taking a paid internship is a good thing to do. Nonprofits rely heavily on volunteers. And so if you have ever been down to the Utah Food Bank, my wife and a bunch of young people this week went and volunteered, and they spent 2 hours processing food. And that organization depends heavily on volunteers. For-profits typically do not have volunteers. Can you name some nonprofits that come to mind? In your mind?
Cross.
Which one?
The American Red Cross.
Okay, American Red Cross.
The Utah nonprofit.
Okay. Yeah.
What about cities and municipalities? Are they nonprofits?
Municipalities are not organized under 501c. They have a different section of the IRS. They're organized differently than the ones we're talking about. Let me tell you about one I just learned about that our foundation just gave a grant to, and I was pretty impressed with. And it kind of shows you the creativity of some of these nonprofits. Have you ever gone to a wedding or a party or a large event where you see all this food put out on the buffet tables, and you know, at the end of it or a conference, you go, what's going to happen to all this food? I mean, there's pastries, there's fruit, there's all this stuff, right? What happens? What do you think happens to it most of the time?
So they get rid of it, or otherwise now you can donate to any nonprofit, and the nonprofit organization will donate to homeless families, children.
Yeah.
That's
You can. A lot of it goes in the garbage, and it makes you sick. As you see all this food. There was a fun little group that got together called Wasteless Solutions of Utah. Started in 2017. They developed an application, almost like Uber, where if you have a large catering event and your audience doesn't turn up and you got all this food, you can actually go on almost like you would at Uber and say, I've got food here. There's volunteers all over our city who will get a little note on their app saying, can you pick up food and take it to the women's shelter or the Utah Food Bank? Would you be willing to do that? And this app is what's driving this for smaller food donations. Their goal is to cut food waste in Utah by half in the next 10 years by this application. They got started. It's like 3 people that got this thing going. And now what they need is they need a little bit of support to help with some of their processes, but it's running on almost all volunteers. There's a social good. They're attacking wasted food, trying to reduce that. And they figured out an organizational structure that can bring in donations and an app that makes it all work. So there's a really interesting, creative way of trying to solve a problem. There are many different types of nonprofits. You can name some of them. Most churches are nonprofit organizations. Educational institutions, there's both private and public. There's a lot of charitable organizations like the Utah Food Bank, 4th Street Clinic, the Lehigh Clinic, lots of these kind of social organizations. There's organizations like Nature Conservancy that work on environmental projects and issues. There are scientific nonprofits, American Cancer. We help one that's called the Bateman Horn Center that works on chronic fatigue. They're a nonprofit. There are literary nonprofits that focus on literacy. We help one of your earlier speakers was Rick Fulkerson, who runs a program called Ready to Read, which is a really neat program that's in the schools to promote reading. And then finally, there are some membership-based nonprofits like Rotary, Boys and Girls Clubs, 4-H. These are ones where people will pay a membership fee. They still run as a nonprofit. The membership doesn't even come close to running the organization, but they're kind of membership-based. There's quite a few of those nonprofits that are like that. How many nonprofits are they? Have Russ advance this. In the state of Utah, in the governor's latest report, 10,707 nonprofit organizations right here. Half of them are right in the Salt Lake metro area. So a lot of nonprofits doing lots of interesting things. There's almost 125,000 employees of these nonprofits, 16 billion in revenues, 34 billion in assets, and they're about 6.7% of the GDP of Utah. So the nonprofit community in Utah is pretty significant and does a lot of work. How do you find opportunities in the nonprofit community? One of the best sources is the Utah Nonprofit Association. This morning, it's basically an organization that supports all the nonprofits, helps them with leadership development, a job board. If you went there today, there's 256 job openings in nonprofits today, to this very day. And they range from entry level to executive level across the wide spectrum of nonprofits. Most nonprofits also write on their websites. So if you were to go to American Red Cross Utah, they probably have a tab on their website that says career opportunities, and on there would be a listing of 3 or 4 jobs that would be open that are opportunities for you to explore. There are also certificate programs. The Utah Nonprofit Association offers a program, an actual certificate that can help you kind of beef up your resume. Like, you know, not only am I looking for a job in the nonprofit, but I have these certificates in fundraising, board development, communications, management, and it's quite a good program. I also noticed that Salt Lake Community College, check it out. They have a course, not in the business school I learned, in nonprofit management. It's a 6-month, pretty affordable program that if you were interested in that, that would be another really good resume answer. Of course, there are graduate programs at our 4-year institutions. I know Westminster College has a wonderful program called Masters in Community Leadership. It's geared specifically to those who want to run a nonprofit or be involved in the community. And finally, one way to get it in with a nonprofit is simply volunteer. You know, when you volunteer, whether it's at almost anything. I mean, you see 5K races, you see there's opportunities that are all over. If you volunteer and get to know some of the people that are working there, they start to recognize you, and before long, I can't tell you how many people in the nonprofit world started as volunteers and then found, hey, I've got skills, I can enhance this program. There are some pros and cons of working in the nonprofit community. These kind of come from my own experience. I think one of the pros is mission-oriented versus profit-oriented. That first job I took that didn't work out, I remember my boss saying to me, don't make mistakes because it's going to cost so-and-so money in his wallet. He doesn't like that. And I remember driving home that night, I thought, our whole purpose is to make this guy wealthy. And it wasn't very motivating to me. And I know there's so many great businesses and for-profit where that's not necessarily the case, but you have to kind of search your soul and say, am I going to be motivated around that profit incentive? It's there, and you just have to be ready for it. In nonprofits, it's all around mission. And I also found that there's a lot of opportunity for growth and development. Many nonprofits are not heavily staffed and deep in resources. So, if you show drive and a willingness to learn, you can go from the business manager to the president. I mean, I'm a good example of somebody who started a smaller college and university in Utah and went through the whole ranks, did lots of interesting work, and ultimately became the president of that institution. I'm not saying that's always the course, but there are tremendous opportunities to expand your skills and your thinking. I think there's a lot of job stability in nonprofits. They don't get bought out. I can't tell you how many people work for companies that as soon as they get sold, they're gone, and then they just lost their job. And you might have been in a career for 10 years and loved the company, and outside of your control, that company sold and it's moved, or it's changed, or it's shut down, and then you're out, and there goes your investment of time and effort. And so nonprofits don't get sold. They do fail from time to time, but they're very stable. As I mentioned, broad job descriptions. You might sign on as a clerk, but you're going to be doing lots of things besides just doing that. And I found that the people that I've worked with in the nonprofit community tend to be really interesting, very dedicated, and that motivated me. And finally, there are some perks and benefits. If you work for a college or university, there's a lot of benefits. Tuition reduction for your attendance, concerts, activities that enrich your life. I mean, you could also work for the Utah Symphony. And if you go there, you're gonna be enriched by incredible classical music. So there are a lot of perks and benefits that go along with working with nonprofits. There are some cons. I find a lot of work there. I started off by saying there's better work-life balance. I think that's true. That doesn't necessarily mean you're doing an 8 to 5 shift. I do find that you work really hard, and they do for sure. It's a lower pay environment, and that's just how it is. It definitely is lower pay. This concept of shared governance just means that oftentimes a nonprofit is. When I ask you who owns Salt Lake Community College, the state of Utah, who owns Westminster College? It really is a community asset that is stewarded by a group of volunteer board members. Same thing applies to organizations like the Utah Symphony, or Ballet West, or the Nature Conservancy. These are organizations that are community assets overseen by volunteer boards, and sometimes that governance structure can be frustrating. Frugality. They're just leaner. They have fewer resources. You'll see it from furniture to the kinds of parties they host. I mean, they're just more frugal in the way they spend money. Sometimes there's a lack of innovation. They just, they're not early trendsetters. If you worked at, if you work down at Adobe down in Utah County, I mean, you've got the latest and greatest stuff. And that may not be the case if you're working at Nature Conservancy. So a little bit lag if you're a technology guru and you just love that. Nonprofits might be a little frustrating. There's a huge focus always on fundraising. I would say everybody in the organization is a fundraiser. If you're not a fundraiser, you're an ambassador for the organization. And, you do events, and so everybody comes and helps, and it's an all hands on deck for fundraising. You're often asked to give to the organization. And then finally, I do think sometimes you can get so caught up in the mission, you just get burned out. But I think that might be true also in the for-profit world. So I've been really fortunate to spend all my career really in nonprofits. And it has been so rewarding, and especially in the last 3 years, to engage with so many different kinds of nonprofits in our community, see the good work, especially during this pandemic period. So many of these were so affected. If you relied on audiences, take like the Utah Symphony or some of our theater companies, they no longer could have an audience. So their earned income went to zero. How do they survive? They had to up their game on fundraising. They had to apply for payroll protection loans. I mean, it was a test of leadership for many of these nonprofits to actually survive. Take something like the Utah Food Bank. Their demand just escalated tenfold, and yet they lost all their volunteers. Couldn't have any volunteers, so they had their staff. If you were the receptionist, you were working the line, packing food. You were trying to figure out ways to still fulfill your mission. So I just grew to really respect so many of our nonprofits over this last little while. I wanted to just finish with a couple of things as I thought about, well, what are a few things that I've learned on this journey that I've had? And I'm, again, at the tail end of my career, you're at the beginning of yours. I do think opportunities are not just handed to you. You have to earn them. And by earn them, you have to do things that put you in a position to be there when the opportunity is presented. I think the fact that you're here in school on a path to education will put you in a place where you will have opportunities presented to you. And then once you're in a career or in a job, don't be afraid to say yes to new opportunities, even if they're really challenging. And I do put a strong emphasis on earn. I don't think things are just given to you. You really have to earn opportunity. All of us spend a lot of time in our careers. So I think, you can decide, it's just a job, or you can find passion in what you're doing. And I've been fortunate, I've never watched the clock. In those early years working for my father in this grocery store, I watched the clock. I could hardly wait for my shift to be over. And I swore I never wanted a job where I was counting the hours when that thing was done. There are a lot of jobs today where it feels like that, where you're watching the clock. So ask yourself this question, is this a job where I'm going to wake up in the morning and be really excited that I get to go to work? Time passes and so does fulfillment. I've been really blessed to have mentors, really all the way along, right from the first accounting job I took with that partner who took an interest in me. And each of the presidents, I worked for 5 college presidents. I was really lucky. Each one of them I learned something from. And when I became president, they were the first ones I called to thank because they had prepared me along the way. I think you can have informal and formal mentors. Informal would be people that you just look up to, that care about you. But you can also turn mentorship into something formal. Ask somebody, hey, would you be my mentor? And would you give me that kind of honest feedback that I really need? Sometimes that doesn't come from your family or your spouse or your companion. And I've had a couple of those formal mentors really help. And then I think also along the way, it'll come a time for you to mentor yourself, mentor those that are coming up. I mean, we've got to build the next generation, take our place. And so it's really a privilege when you have a young student or somebody come to you and say, would you be my mentor? Yeah, say yes to it. I've been really helped by it. Really be an ambassador for who you work for. Not all the jobs you have will be ones that you love. And you meet people sometimes that are working. I don't care if it's McDonald's or whatever they do. They just complain. And I have found in my career that wherever I've worked, I wanted to be a #1 ambassador. Talk about them, live the brand, and it really has paid off for me. I had a big W on me 37 years at Westminster, and I just lived that school, believed in it, and it wasn't that everything always went right there, but wherever you are, I think those that you work for, you'll be surprised. Just being a good ambassador and being grateful that they gave you the opportunity. Obviously, learning from your mistakes. I've made a bunch of mistakes along the way. And, I've had to ask forgiveness from bosses and all kinds of things, but I always felt like if I own the mistakes right up front, not try to run from them, and then really did a serious introspection after about what can I learn from what I just did that was wrong. It really helped. Little things, just being grateful. I can't tell you what handwritten personal notes mean. I know we live in a world of texts and but I have made, I can't tell you how successful I've been with philanthropy in just handwritten personal notes of things. And so find a way in your own style to always express gratitude to those that help you or that you work for. Never burn bridges. No matter where you work, whatever career opportunities, if you, you're just shocked as you get further along in life that how these people keep coming back into your life. And it's so grateful that you can look at them and not feel like, wow, that was somebody that relationship ended really badly. Don't want to see them. You know, just don't burn bridges in your career. Finally, I call it pay it forward. If you're helped now, and I was helped when I was a senior at the university, I got a scholarship from a neat couple that helped me, and it made all the difference for me in my senior year. But I remember at the dinner with him where he presented me this scholarship. He said, the only thing I ask of you is one day I want you to return the favor to another student. And his words really ring with me all the time. You're going to find a time in your career where you want to pay it back. You want to give of your time. You want to volunteer for an organization. You want to make a difference. So, gosh, I'm probably out of time, and
You are
I hope this is giving you a little glimpse into the world of nonprofits, open your vision a little bit about at least considering them. And again, I thank you for letting me share my journey.